Excuse me. I'm Eric Firestone. I just want to, first of all, just thank everybody for coming. And there's a lot of things going on a Saturday in August, a rainy day in the Hamptons. So thank you all for being here. I just really wanted to briefly just say something from my heart. I've been here since 2010, which is 8 years. And I live here full time. I have a gallery here, and this is my primary residence with my family. And we have the loft space in the city as well too, which we've been doing shows during the season in New York. And the most important thing is to understand the history of what has transpired out here and who was here and what they did. And this is a contribution to the community, what we're doing here, and something that we are making an annual show as long as I have this gallery here in East Hampton. So this is the second year of this show. We did it last year. I intend to engage the community with scholarship, panel discussions, a legendary lineup this afternoon. And I thank you all for your support. So thank you very much. I'm going to introduce you. This is Jennifer Samet, who's the director of research for the gallery, and who will also be introducing the panelists this evening. So thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Eric and Angela.
Can you hear the
and the Firestones. And I just want to also say I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so proud of our work as a gallery. And thank you all for coming today to see this exhibition. And I'm so proud that we have an amazing panel here today of very esteemed art historians and filmmakers and biographers. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I can talk louder.
Stand up.
I could stand. Do I need to stand?
Yeah.
Really? Like forever? Okay. All right, I'll start standing. Okay, hi. Yeah. So I just want to introduce our panel. And to my left is Barbara Rose, who is an art historian and curator and critic. She was the senior curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston and the founding director of the Katzen Art Center at American University in Washington, D.C. And she's the author of the major textbook, American Art Since 1900, and American Painting the 20th Century. That's from 1970, as well as numerous monographs. She also curated the exhibition Lee Krasner, a retrospective, and we're lucky enough to have a Lee Krasner behind us here. She curated that exhibition for the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston and the Museum of Modern Art in 1983-84. And she's also the producer of 8 films, including Lee Krasner, The Long View, which she directed and produced, and which was edited by Lana Jokel, who is here. And it's going to be shown tomorrow, is that right? It's going to be shown tomorrow here in town at Guild Hall at 3 o'clock. This is a film that was made in 76, you said? 1976.
Yeah, and
No, 70.
It's
77.
Well,
I'm
Gail's better at dates. If she says
I'm
77,
terrible at dates for an artist.
Coming on it. Remember?
you are it, yeah. And as a young art historian who's doing her research, and so she's definitely, because it is a documentary. This painting you see being made by Lee Krasner in the film, and it's very interesting to hear her views of why she's doing it, how she's doing it, and so kind of linked to the other event.
Great, so that's a great connection. Lana Jokel is a documentary filmmaker, and she's made films about Howard Kanovitz, who's represented in this show, Andy Warhol, Oldenburg, Larry Rivers, the New York School, as well as American Art in the 60s, and A Moment in Time, which is a film about 12 artists in the Hamptons from visits that she made in the 1990s to their studios and homes. And Lana is going to be showing us a clip that she specially edited for this occasion that's about Larry Rivers and de Kooning. Clips from 2 films, yes. Okay, thank you. And Gail Levin, who is in the middle, is a distinguished professor of art history, American studies, and women's studies at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of CUNY, and served as the first curator of the Hopper collection at the Whitney Museum of American Art. And she is the author of 3 biographies on Hopper, on Judy Chicago, and on Lee Krasner. So I'm very excited that they're all here to share their stories and remembrances of a lot of artists in this exhibition. Thank you. So we're going to start by showing the film. Okay.
Well, maybe I should say how
Oh, okay.
quickly then. I just want to say that I was brought out here by Andy Warhol in the early 70s, and I was editing his and Paul Morris's film called Heat. So then Andy introduced me to Larry and Larry Rivers, so on. And then right after that, I was making my own documentary on Andy, so I spent some time out here editing my film. Subsequently, I edited also many of Michael Blackwood and Barbara Rose's films on the New York School, American Art in the 60s, Motherwell, Guston, etc. So I had a lot of experience editing. And when it came to the New York School film, we needed a sequence from de Kooning.
But this was the film that Ron and I made on the New York School, which is kind of a classic
On
of
the
this
New York
point.
School, yeah, with many artists.
And so for the sequence on de Kooning, we were kind of out here by ourselves, and I was interviewing people because I knew a lot of the artists, and neither of us really knew de Kooning very well, but we needed a de Kooning sequence, and so Lana went out and shot it herself. We didn't have a cameraman that day, we had Lana.
Well, it was because I asked Larry to introduce me, and Larry at that time was doing his first video camera, so he said, he called up Bill and said, can I come and visit, and I would bring my video camera, and I want to bring a young friend, and you know, so I went with my Canon Screwfix 16mm camera without a sync sound. I just took a separate tape recorder. So we went there, and so I filmed this whole sequence of Bill at his new studio, which you see in the clip. And so this is what happened, and then we incorporated that sequence into the New York School film. And that's all I have to say.
There's 2 seats up here, by the way, if anyone wants to sit.
There are 2 seats.
2 chairs, right in the front. The best place. Okay, thank you. So are you
Yeah, I think you can just show the
Okay.
clip. I'm done.
From Ang, he emphasized drawing and line.
we
De
need to go
Kooning's
back.
best-known series, which spans 3 decades from the Kooning founded New York Freedom from Academic.
Okay.
So the voice is me, because I
Trained in Amsterdam's Fine Arts Academy, Philip de Kooning founded New York Freedom from Academic Convention. An admirer of Ang, he emphasized drawing and line. De Kooning's best-known series, which spans 3 decades from the 30s to the 60s, are his women. As the image of a gargantuan, voluptuous female evolved, fluid line gave way to angry slashing, and the toothy, grinning figure became more grotesquely distorted. Thick paint was applied with violent aggressivity, and drips and splatters suggested a raw, spontaneous emotion.
He used to, as you know, hang around a lot with Gorky, and he was always very deferential to Gorky. Gorky would do all the talking. De Kooning would sit in the corner. He tended in those days to efface himself vis-a-vis Gorky. The thing that attracted me to him most at the beginning was his enthusiasm about certain neighborhoods in New York. You know, De Kooning, the great walker. We were all great walkers in those days, partly because we didn't have enough money to do anything else, so we used to spend a lot of time walking around.
De Kooning began to spend more and more time in East Hampton because it reminded him of the flat, green landscape of his native Holland. And the East Hampton beaches attracted a close-knit set of painters, writers, poets, and others in the arts.
That all the artists in Europe, the refugee artists, came here. And they thought we were very good artists. And Gorky was almost persecuted here by being called a phony and this and all those things. When André Breton came here and he saw Gorky's work, he wrote when the European artists thought they were good artists, like Max Ernst, like my work and other people. And then they started a group with what we call the New York School, but they gave us that name, Abstract Expressionists, you see. So from then on, all of a sudden New York became the art center. That's why. Because it had a lot to do with the war and coming here. And we were ready, we were very good artists. Mark Rothko, Clifford Still, and Motherwell, myself, and we were all good artists, and all of a sudden they start seeing us, Even then, we sold paintings only maybe for $500-600, but at least you could get some money. And what is his name? Alfred Barr, In those days you couldn't get into the museum with a cobalt ball, Huh? Well, he said to me, he said it right before, he says, I like your Italian suit. I just came back from Italy. And I said, listen, I said after a minute, after like 40, 45, you don't mention his suits anymore. Well, that's a kind of funny friendliness if you're an artist and he knows you so long. Instead of giving you a show, put you in there. Instead talking about your suit once in a while. It goes from one day and the other, you never really feel like you did it. And then you have a few you kind of like and the other one you don't like so much, and then you think you try it again. I'm talking for myself now. I guess it meant like Mark Rothko, who slowly went to the perfection of those late paintings, you know what I mean? I make a lot of drawings, with my eyes closed, or look at television. But the painting-wise, I really don't, it's really like a style painting. And I use large brushes, so there's no way, it doesn't change much, it's just that the picture changes, but not the technique. I'm probably more an action painter than most. Also, I'm a very eclectic artist, in the sense that I love painting, and it jumps from one to the other. So from that point of view, I'm just an old-fashioned painter, and I think it's so nice that since the cave paintings until today, it's nice to do something which is already done for 30,000 years. The last time I went to Rome, and by accident I found some early Christian Roman paintings when the Romans were still Romans. The painting is so fabulous that it's just like modern painting, you see, for me. I did this before I came. Oh yeah. This might be on. This is a song. There's a small speech I can carry around. Hit my accent. I don't sound like that to myself. Sound like some old fool. Old Dutch fool.
Potential, Larry. There's real potential there.
Take it from here to here, and you see another kind of face. Or an animal. If you eliminate the head, if you can ever get shadows around there, this whole part almost takes on some kind of crazy deer. Okay. Guess I'll have to play mariachi. Lana, I want to show you something that I've been doing for about 10 years, which is, you see this? With a pencil that I use for my work, I just do this. You go down with this watch. Now I do that. See?
What a nice trick.
See?
Very
You little did you know that. That took at least 15 minutes off my age. I felt as if I had nothing the rest of my life. I could have been knocked off at any point with the drugs, with this and that and everything like that. And that I seemed to, even with this sort of not too very educated beginning, with all the sort of hindrance of foreign accents in my background, all the things that were probably stacked up against Jews at the beginning, things like that. I felt as if they were overcome in some way with my luck. I am trying to tell people that don't worry about where you come from, how little seems to exist for you at the moment. Just keep doing that, and that's the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Lana.
And I got to curate Larry's retrospective.
Trained at Amsterdam's Fine Arts Academy, Phil
I just have one comment. You know, the films that I make usually, I like to kind of
Speak up, please.
The films that I make, I like to delve into the personality, the character of the person, the artist, because you see the artist's works, but I like to show you what the person behind it is, and so there's a very natural, kind of spontaneous thing, and you see them very alive. They come alive on screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, that's like a great place to start our conversation, I think. Lana was saying that starting with the personalities of the artists, because all three of you have engaged biography as a part of your art historical methodology and like approach to art history. No,
I have
Barbara's
never
saying
had
no.
anything to do with biography.
Okay.
On any form.
Good. Okay. So
I'm just a really boring academic art historian.
it's interesting.
But I
think
did
of you
curate-
engaging biography.
I did curate Larry's retrospective at the program. And I mean, to know who Larry was and what it was like to work with him, I would go there to his loft on 14th Street, and he'd be there all sweating because he was constantly exercising because he wanted to be physically perfect or whatever. And he'd open the door in his t-shirt and he'd say, "You want to fuck?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do you want to eat?" I said, "Yes." And then he would take me to the same horrible Polish restaurant. I mean, Larry was a movie in and of himself. He was a fantastic character, but he belongs very much in this group. And but of course these are all abstract painters, and he was a figurative artist.
Yes.
And that is a whole discussion in and of itself. Why some of the painters like Larry at the time, but later Al Leslie, decided to be figurative rather than abstract.
What do you think of that idea of separating out the abstractionists or the abstract artists?
The world wasn't like that at that time. Now, whether or not they were dealing with aesthetic questions in the same way is another question that needs to be resolved. But the art scene, such as it was, I mean, and they were called the 10th Street artists, the 10th Street School, because they showed it on 10th Street, and they were looked down upon by the first generation of abstract expressionists who thought they were all de Kooning imitators. And that was, at that time, the way they were looked at. Now, we look at it again, and it looks quite different. But they did have to choose between abstraction and representation.
And it is true that, for example, Miriam Shapiro over there, you can see its lineage from de Kooning, I think. I can really see we were talking about it earlier, the legs and the body of a woman wearing an apron, I think, with a sash.
That looks right.
And maybe that's the baby, her son in the bassinet to the right. But Mimi gave up abstraction, abstract expressionism at least, for pattern and decoration, which had a lot of figuration in it. So she really moves toward the figure, but she's very young. She's the next generation, so that's so natural. But I think, especially the artist that came out here, as she did, abstract expressionism, like it was in the air. They had to imbibe it. So it's very interesting. I agree with Barbara that there's not a strong wall between figuration and abstraction.
Right. The painting is actually called Autobiography, and we were talking for a second about biography, and I know Lee Krasner once said that all of her work is about her biography. Is that right? And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that idea and how biography might add to an interpretation of the painting, even though it is abstract.
Well, Lee said that comment about biography, but she said it, I think she finished it off, something if anyone cares to know it or interpret it. I mean, to say her pictures are autobiographical, it's also to know what's going on. One can sort of understand them, or some of the emotional force from what's going on in her life. But it's tricky because, as she pointed out, right after Pollock dies, she's painting very vivid, very warm colors, very hot colors that you might think are really cheerful. And she talked about how when she was painting them, tears were streaming down her face.
Wow.
So she did give us clues. And so I try to use what's going in her life as a lens to look at her art, or many artists.
I think that authentic artists paint out of their feelings, I mean, whatever they might be. And I walked in the gallery and I said to Eric, you know, this looks like what they're doing today is reruns. I mean, the people, you know, young people are really mining this period, but they're doing bad copies and they don't feel it. And that's the difference. I mean, these are deeply felt works that come out of the emotions of the artists who are painting them. You know, it was a good day, it was a bad day, you can tell from the paintings. I mean, Mimi was having a good day. And I agree with Gail, it looks like an apron, and she was very much of a mom and a housewife. I mean, she kept a great kitchen.
She used to complain that her studio was in her dining room, I think, early on.
Yeah.
In fact, it was Leo Steinberg that made some derisive comment about that in the city, that he had to walk through, I think, the kitchen to get to her studio, which was the dining room or something.
Well, I mean, you can't believe how these people lived, of course, because now they're, you know, well known, and some of them are extremely well known. But at the time, everyone was terribly poor. All these people knew each other, and you know, you basically ate together, you did everything together because you really had no money. And so the parties or whatever it was, or the club, it was all a group it was a club. And they all went to the club, the Artist Club, which was directed by Philip Pavia. And there they exchanged ideas and things that don't go on now any longer. I mean, that you don't have that kind of interchange among artists because everybody's competing with everybody else.
It would be important to point out that the club, though, as I'm sure you're going to agree, was very misogynistic. So it wasn't too great for
excuse
women.
me, but who wasn't misogynist? I mean, you know, I was watching those Me Too things on television and I thought, I never really thought about this, you know? It's just like, you just took it for granted you were going to be ignored and stepped on. I mean, that just was part of the, you know, that was the deal. And most of these women, you know, were, their role was to be the housewives, the mothers, and some of them rebelled against it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think they all took it for granted.
No, they didn't. No,
I don't think Mimi Shapiro did, and I don't think Lee Krasner did at all. I think that they were among the rebels.
You know, I knew them both very well, and I actually lived with Mimi and Paul Brack, her painter husband, for a while in Southern California, and she was the housefrau. I mean, Paul wasn't doing anything, he was going to the studio.
So, but, okay, so as they get a little bit older, by the late 60s, early 70s, by the time she does Woman House, which is about
Well, she's become a feminist.
interrogating,
She's become a major force in the feminist movement, and their marriage probably went down the drain at that point, I don't know. But it was very communal, you know. But there's a book coming out now called Ninth Street Women, which I recommend to everybody because I think it's wonderful, by Mary Gabriel, and it's a story about the 5 women who were in the original 1951 Ninth Street show, which established the first generation of abstract expressionists of the New York School. And those 5 women were Lee Krasner, Helen Frankenthaler, Joan Mitchell, Grace Hartigan, and Elaine de Kooning. And they had, they struggled. They all struggled greatly. Their lives were not easy. But they fought. I mean, they were, you know, I'm working on a show called Amazons. And it's about women who struggle and fight and survive the fight. And I think it's very important.
I would say that some of the women artists dealt with the situation for women very differently. For example, drinking heavily, as in Joan Mitchell. You know,
Joan's life was a nightmare.
Exactly. So that I think certain other women were much better able to be stronger and more assertive. And
like who? Lee's life was a nightmare. I mean, come on.
Well,
it was a nightmare.
I think by the time Pollock died, it was less of a nightmare.
Then what?
After Pollock's death.
It was very, very hard. It was sort of
I would say it wasn't hard, but I don't think it was a nightmare.
No, she could concentrate on her own work.
I personally think that she stood up to Emma Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg very well.
Now, Gail has just opened a conversation about how the women fared in the art world. Well, there were a lot of men who were perfectly willing to have them as equals as artists, but you had 2 major misogynistic critics who were not going to look at their work. Both Greenberg and Rosenberg were major, major misogynists.
I've been struck in your book, Gail, by how much of Lee's life was really about rebelling from the circumstances under which she grew up. You know, she comes from this very religious Jewish upbringing, and in order to live the life that she lives, it's just a complete rejection of everything. And I wonder if that was part of what attracted you to her as a subject.
Unquestionably. I agree that I was really fascinated by her ability to withstand the pressure to conform from the moment she's a child in that Orthodox Jewish family. None of her siblings made it out of Brooklyn. She made a whole life for herself. Her younger sister, Ruth, was very jealous as a result. And yes, Krasner was pretty much old enough to be my grandmother, and to know her for me was totally fascinating because unlike my grandmother, she completely rebelled or broke out of the mold that was expected. And I was really curious how she did it. So for me, that was a dramatic aspect of her life.
Well, Lee was liberty or death, and I understand that. I thought she was my mother. And when she died, I had a nervous breakdown. And, you know, she was a terribly important person to me as a friend as well, but I really literally thought she was my mother because I didn't really like my mother very much.
Really, I didn't either. I didn't either, so she was also a good mother for me.
Well,
Like I'm a grandmother. I like my grandmother.
Well, in this film on Krasner, which I'm going to show tomorrow in Guildhall, which Lana edited, Gail is this young researcher. So she has the cameo role, but she's doing all this research for the book that finally became the early years of abstract expressionism. And it really is a very, very important key research. I mean, nobody did that research. When I did my research, some of the things were available, some of them weren't, but I didn't concentrate on that period, which is the period of these paintings. And
That was so exciting, that time when that's when I first met you, Barbara.
Yeah.
And I'm Lee's house guest, and I'm the curator. Come out from the Whitney, the young curator, still in my 20s, and Lee gets a call, and it's Barbara Rose, and she said, Barbara Rose wants you to stay over so you can interview me for the film. And gee, that was so exciting.
well, I think anything that one did that made Lee's contribution permanent was important, and to understand what she did as an artist and a person is vital to the understanding of the history of art. I'm fascinated that this painting is here because she's making it in the movie. That's what the movie documents, is her making that particular work.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this painting, which is so interesting because it's actually a painting where she made it in the 70s, and she had found these drawings that she did when she was still a student at the Hans Hofmann School. And she cuts them up and collages them into this painting many years later. And I wonder if you have like any insights you can share about the making of this. It was a series of paintings that she did at the time. It's such a fascinating thing to do, to take her student drawings. It happens to be a teaching method of Hans Hofmann, that he would actually tear up students' drawings to demonstrate how to make space when they're drawing from the still life or figure.
She didn't cut them all up.
Okay.
But Brian Robertson, curator for retrospective at Whitechapel Gallery in 1965 in London, who became a close friend, he happened to come over, and looking around, she found a portfolio of drawings, and she went through them and rejected a bunch of them, and those are the ones she cut up. But in a sense, she was rejecting Hoffman's intervention, his working on student drawings. And I imagine some of the ones she cut up are the ones that she could see his hand in, because she really was into that.
Well, of course, the famous thing that Hoffmann says to Lee, he's looking at one of her cubist drawings, charcoal drawings, which are then recycled and cut up in these collage paintings, and he says, "This is so good, you would never know it was done by a woman."
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering what you think of a show like this. I mean, it's so rare to have a show like this. Today's art world, nobody shows this incredible artists who are all dead now. And so I want to...
Lana's asking,
This is what the museums are not doing, because they're too busy showing, little toys or little gadgets or little whatever that the investors are going back and forth. I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on in museums. And this is an historic show. This is an historic moment. And for that reason, it's very interesting. And I think, it's important that we look at what art history really was.
What do you mean when you say that? Look at what art history really was.
Well, this is the early 50s, okay?
Right.
And so it's the formative years of the New York School. These people are now forming their mature styles. Well, what are they doing? They're revolting against Cubism, against hard-edged geometric art. They want to do something else. They want to be free. And so you see them searching. It's a period of searching, even for a great artist like de Kooning. I mean, he's not yet in his mature style. So it's to me a very interesting moment, because it tells you what they were thinking, what they aspired to, but could not yet accomplish, because that comes later in the late 50s. Then they know where they're going, and they have the equipment, and they have the know-how and the skills to actually paint the paintings they want to paint.
What do you think, Gail?
Well, I think it's a show that is fascinating, and what I like about it is shows the zeitgeist, the spirit of the moment, and the spirit of the community, and how it all came
Yes.
together.
Yes.
But it is fascinating, that little Lee Montague sculpture, which is still so figurative, and it's interesting as she goes and becomes much more abstract.
Can you imagine that that's where she started? I mean, that is amazing.
So there are gems here everywhere, but I think there is that tension, that connection to the figure which dissipates in a lot of this work, or is missing, but it's there as I pointed out, that we see the legs, it's like a de Kooning woman pieced together in Shapiro's autobiography painting. And then I must say, I like the way the women, from Pearl Fine to Lee Montague to Krasner and Shapiro, are well represented here.
Yes.
It's what I can talk, I mean, this is like, for me, I just get obsessed and kind of just go on a pretty hard treasure hunt. I was reading Gail's biography on Lee, and this past month, I'm a skimmer, I don't really read, but I had to actually read the book, and I'm making notes as I'm doing it, and I can only take doses of it because it's, as you said, it's so dense. And it's like, there's a mention of Zogdown. I'm like, oh, well, for Zogdown, I gotta find the Zogdown. I find the Zogdown sculpture. I put it in context here. And, it's so interesting. The history has a way of just kind of talking about these canon artists. They don't talk about, the whole scene and the context of it. And so, to me, that's what this show is all about. It's about bringing together the different players in the scene, because they all had voices. It's not just one voice or two voices. They're there. And so, but to the comment about the women are well represented, I hope I can always find material that's diverse for the show, and I'm fortunate enough that I have some really nice examples of the work. Lee Montague's work is funny because I think the piece was made in Italy. She only made these works for like one summer. I think she was in Sardinia or something like that. She made these ceramic works.
Oh, because it looks a little bit like Constantino Nivola. I wonder if she knew him in Sardinia.
Yeah, and the reason why that work is in the show is I don't even know if Lee actually spent much time out here or not, but the reason it's in the show is because with Helen Harrison, who's going to speak here later in the month, Helen put the research at Signet Gallery, Lee showed at Signet Gallery. And so there's many examples of works in here that maybe are artists that actually just showed at Signet that didn't have studios out here. So
it's worth pointing out that Signet Gallery was run in part by Alfonso Osorio, who is a major patron of Krasner and Pollock and of the community in general, and an artist in his own right.
You were talking a little bit about some of the things that are in common in the show. And I wonder if when you look around, you see these kind of aesthetic markers that are points of commonality between the artists, and whether you think that is about, I think you used the word zeitgeist, that's about the zeitgeist of the time, or whether it's about the interchange between the artists, or how do you define those kinds of commonalities that happen?
Well, certainly the gestural stroke is very much in the air.
I think it's about trying to escape from Cubism, to trying to find an alternative to Cubism. They're not really looking at German Expressionism, so the Expressionist part of it, I'm still trying to figure out where it came from. I don't know, where do you think it came from?
Where do I think?
The Expressionist aspect.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think they're looking at
surrealism, from the spontaneous gesture of in Miro. Written a lot about Miro's influence.
Well, Miro was terribly important because he was here in 1947. And of course, Dubuffet came here in 1951 with a figurative style. and really changed de Kooning's head around. So, and of course, Pollock had been the figurative
And of
artist.
course, that connection is through Alfonso Osorio, who is the
Well, Osorio was incredibly important, and I knew him, and he was a fantastic person. I mean, he was terrific, and I think he's a
Indeed, he was.
terrific artist, and somebody who deserves more attention and is getting more attention. He was from the upper class in the Philippines, and he had a first cousin named Zobel, Zobel, and they both went to Harvard, and then Zobel went to Spain and founded an artist colony, and then Alfonso came here and founded an artist colony because people came because Alfonso had a little bit of money and he would help people, when they were in trouble, he would buy something or whatever.
But Barbara, actually, Pollock and Krasner were out here. They brought Alfonso out, and they came out because Harold Rosenberg was out here. In fact, when they moved out, they were driving out Harold Rosenberg's wife's brother's butcher truck was their moving van. So they went. I don't think Alfonso can have full credit for organizing the scene out here. It predates him.
Well, he gave the parties and he had the money, but no, in terms
He
of
was
the time.
important, I would grant. Yeah, I agree.
And he saw the Pollocks a great deal, and he was friendly with both of them.
Very crucial to Jackson's.
But he also, I mean,
success.
actually, when the first time I came out here, when I was still in school, I can't remember who took us to Alfonso's. It was D'Antonio.
Filmmaker.
But Osorio bought all of the great first generation artists, and he had the Clifford Stills, and then Clifford Still didn't like the way he was showing them, so he climbed in the window, took a knife, cut his painting out of the frame, and jumped back out the window with his painting. So, I don't know what happened there.
That's interesting. I don't know that story, but that's almost a precursor to Alfonso's partner, Ted Dragon, going into windows and coming out with antiques during the winter.
Yes, there was a certain amount of looseness that went on, shall we say, and a great deal of drunkenness because all of these people drank, and the women did too. They were very drunk. Everybody was drunk all the time. It was before drugs. It was a different scene, people. But they cared about each other. There was it was a family. Let's put it that way. It was a very small group of people who, better, worse, whatever. They were all in it together. They had no money, and they took care of each other.
I don't know if I would agree with that 100%.
Well, I was thinking.
I'm thinking of Harold Rosenberg having affairs with.
Oh please. Please. I mean, Harold was
multiple women.
Please. Harold was an obscenity.
I don't think he was. Obscenity wasn't taking care of anyone but her.
And look, I mean, who would have an affair with Harold Rosenberg?
University Matter and Elaine de Kooning at the same moment. He was very destructive.
Well, how about Greenberg?
Even more destructive.
There you go.
But in a different way. Not
there
so
you,
much.
I mean,
no, he's the one that provided Pollock's last therapist, who told Pollock that it was okay to drink and drive. And if he liked young girls, that was good too. And he also told that to Judy Collins. Yes, he got disbarred in New York State.
They were all womenizers in those days, especially, and sex was all over the place. That period, especially.
Thank you.
But that therapist.
No, you had to run away from these guys. These are old guys. They're jumping you. You're little girls. What? That's just ridiculous.
But the therapist was from that cult before the stage.
Well, there are two kinds of Sylvanians, the good ones and the bad ones.
Exactly.
And Clem took Jackson to the bad ones, and Lee was very upset about it.
She had one too. He got her.
Yeah, but she was with the good Sylvanians.
No, she wasn't.
She was with the bad ones?
Yeah.
With Ralph?
But her therapist kind of realized what was bad about the bad Sylvanians, and he fled to Australia. He literally made a new life for himself.
No, I mean, the bad Sylvanians, there were two groups, the William Allen White Institute and the...
They were all from there, but what happened is the other group was a breakaway group led by the bookkeeper. That was his psychoanalytic training. He had been the bookkeeper at the William H. White Institute.
So the message was, everything that's happened to you up till today is a mistake. So don't think about it, forget those people and start again. And if it feels good and you like it, that's good. So if you want to drink and drive, or you like young girls but you're married, that's great if it feels good.
They didn't like any familial relationships. They wanted to take children away from the parents.
Oh no, it was a seriously dangerous and evil cult.
There's a sort of like tone that you're talking about, Barbara, where it's just like, this is how it was. And I wonder whether you see like this kind of a show and other exhibitions that are really making a strong attempt to bring women back into this art history, and whether you think that we're still kind of uncovering that, and whether that's driven some of the work that you've done, like your work on Lee Krasner.
It didn't have any, I mean, I am not a feminist, and it had nothing to do with anything I did. I'm interested in the quality of the work. I mean, I don't care if it's a man, a woman, a dog, a transgender, or whatever. I really don't care. I look at the work. So no, it had nothing to do with.
I would like to remind you and the audience that you you organized a very important show earlier than the Krasner retrospective at NYU and Guildhall called Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, A Working Relationship.
I did it before the MoMA show, that's true. And I did it at Guildhall, and because it was a working relationship. I mean, they were in constant conversation. Lee was Jackson's teacher and his critic. Nothing could leave the studio without her approval. She had to say it's okay to go. And she was in the studio with him all the time, as you can see from the novel photographs.
That was really a very interesting show, and for a young art historian, it was a rather feminist show at the time, from my perspective. And as a matter of fact, that was when it went to the Gray Art Gallery at NYU. It was Lee who asked me to speak in the symposium, and that's when I had a lot of exchange with her. She was sending me photocopies of articles about her with little notes, and that was all thanks to you, Barbara. Thank you.
I don't know, I was just interested in the nature of their interchange, their artistic interchange, far more than, what was the marriage about, whatever.
So you might not have thought of it as feminist, but for me, as a young scholar, it seemed feminist.
Well, I saw her as an equal.
Which seemed feminist in that, Irving Sandler's book had just come out a few years earlier, and he didn't even mention that Lee Krasner was an artist. There were no women in abstract expressionism. The Triumph of Abstract Expressionism came out in 1971. No women artists in it at all. And Lee was thanked for her archival help as Lee Pollock, or Lee Krasner Pollock, and she never went by that name as an artist, as you know.
Never.
So your work in that show seemed, compared to what the guys were doing, not only the critics, but Irving Sandler, the younger critic, writer, yours seemed very feminist to me from that perspective.
I don't know.
I was grateful for it.
Lana, do you want to jump into this question?
I just want them to talk a little about this show. I mean, I'm not as expert as they are about some of these works. Is there any special comments you can talk about some of? I mean, there's some fantastic jams on the walls. I would like to hear a little bit more about them.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, from an aesthetic point of view, what they're dealing with is trying to find a new conception of space, which is not like Cubist space. And they're bringing it all forward, and they're trying to make it more immediate, and to be in a way a more aggressive approach toward the spectator. But it's a specific moment. It's after the war, okay? We've just won World War II, and this is like 7 years, or pretty much 6, 7 years after. And a lot of the guys. And this is terribly important. The guys got the GI Bill, the women didn't. And that's why men had an enormous advantage, because they could afford to go to art school. Mm-hmm. Women had to work, but they had to be models, they had to be goddess.
Waitresses, Leslie in her Chinese pajamas.
Who?
Lee was a waitress, remember?
Oh, yeah.
The 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, but then there was the WPA and women had parity. So you had this brief period in which on the WPA, women, African Americans, Native Americans, they all had the same rights, the same salaries, the same whatever. That was this brief period in the 30s during the Depression when the government started the public works of the public works of art project, and they all had they had to make work for post offices and school buildings. And actually, I did a movie in which, for some reason, I found the footage of the WPA artist who's painting the murals in Larry Rivers High School. And Larry says, well, this is why I became an artist, because I lived with these murals, and it gave me the idea that I could be an artist. But Larry was always torn between, was he a saxophone player, or was he a painter, or was both? But his real name was Yitzhak Grossberg. So Larry Rivers was an idea of what would a jazz musician's name be. And Larry kept making himself up, I mean, constantly. And I looked in there, there's a little Howie Kanowitz painting, and it's a painting of Larry playing the sax. Now, Larry played the sax every weekend in a jazz club in the city. And I can't remember which one it was, but I do remember going to these agonizing, which one?
Five spot.
The 5 spot, yeah. I remember going to these agonizing concerts of Larry playing the sax. And he was better than Bill Clinton, but that was about it.
I think that there is one concept that, or one idea that affected a lot of these works and the artists hasn't been mentioned at all.
Okay.
And I would say that Krasner encountered it already in the 30s when she was in the Artists Union. And that is the pressure and dictates from Moscow, from communism, to paint social realism.
Yeah.
Krasner didn't want to hear from that. She didn't want anybody telling her how to paint, and certainly not to paint politics. And she kind of discovered it because they were kind of sub rosa. And then you have the war, and then you have suddenly the Joseph McCarthy hearings and the really repression of the left. And it was very dangerous to be perceived as political on the left. It was much safer to be an abstract painter or a sculptor. And I think that that is at least a strand of what happens with abstract art in the United States from the 30s through the 50s.
Well, no, the artists were being watched. I mean, all of those big staring eyes in the Pollock paintings, well, he's being watched by the FBI. And they're being followed, most of them, because they were seen as a radical element. They had worked for the project where Marxism was actually discussed, God forbid. And the Mexican muralists had come to...
Siqueiros, especially, was
Yeah,
very radical.
I had it's in my archives, but Bob Motherwell sent me a note, and he said, nobody knows this, but after Siqueiros unsuccessfully tried to kill Trotsky, he came back to New York and was hidden in Pollock's studio.
Wow.
I don't know that it's true, but I mean, Motherwell, I think...
I think that Krasner might have a lot to say about that, but she certainly had Trotsky's writings in her library.
She had what?
Trotsky's writings.
Oh, I know.
And from before she met Pollock.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that was the 30s, of course.
And that came from Igor Panchuhov, her previous lover, almost 10 years, who was also Russian, but at not like Krasner's parents, not Russian Jewish, but white Russian Tsarist.
Well, poor Eastern European Jews in the 30s were all Marxists, including my grandfather. So, I mean, you know, my Polish grandfather. They were all Marxists.
Not necessarily in the Deep South.
Maybe not.
No.
I lived in the South, but not the Deep South.
No, the Deep South, there was, we had the Leo Frank lynching in the 20s in Georgia, and So there was, and we had the Klan very active. It was a lot riskier to be a Marxist Jewish immigrant in the Deep South.
Great. I have more questions, but I also wanted to open it up to
Yeah.
all of you at this point. I'm sure you have some comments or questions. Yes.
I have a question for you, Barbara. Since we got into the nitty-gritty of who's having an affair with whom and whatnot, I wonder about the word feminism. And I wonder why you're so opposed to using it.
I'll tell you
when
why.
everything you say sounds feminist to me.
Whatever you can interpret it as. But the point is, I am against ghettos. I am against feminist ghettos. I'm against gay ghettos. I am for the human race. And I really dislike any kind of ghettoization. And I don't, you know, I'm not interested in African American ghetto. I'm just not interested in ghettos. It's my personality. It's my interpretation of what I believe in. And I believe in the human race. And I believe in working for the benefit of the human race, not one part of it.
Well, I want to just say that I don't think feminists only work for women. I think they simply work for, I think feminism is about making a more equitable society for everyone.
Okay, but if that means supporting second-rate women artists, I'm not going to do it. I've never done that. No, I mean, I had to change the department I was teaching in because they were radical lesbian feminists, and I didn't believe that teaching art history about second-rate historical women artists was correct. I mean, one has to focus on quality, focus on the quality of the work. I mean, I was interested in Lee because she's a great artist, not because she was a woman.
Someone was telling me recently that they remembered Miriam Shapiro coming to talk, I think it was at Yale, very early on. And when she gave a lecture, she said, "I'm interested in making work for women." And I wonder if that sounds like right to you, or is maybe somehow part of this
such
discussion.
a depressing idea.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
depressing.
she was a member of the Heresies Collective, that's a journal and a group, and it's entirely conceivable that she could have felt or said that.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you want to affect social change, you have to go to extremes.
Yeah.
Well, Lee Krasner was anti-feminist, okay?
I wouldn't say that Lee was a feminist, I agree with you.
Well, it was more than that. She just didn't want to be lumped with women. She wanted to be
She
acknowledged.
certainly did not, I agree completely.
At the same time, she was really rebelling against all of the social constraints of the time.
She was very
from her
feisty.
childhood. Yeah.
She was very feisty for herself, but she was really afraid of what Barbara says, the women's ghetto. That you're quite correct about.
First of all, to be an artist, period, in America in the early 50s was in and of itself an act of revolt, because America was basically anti-visual art. I mean, until they finally absorbed the lesson of the Europeans who came over during the war, you had a very anti-art environment.
I don't know if I would think that it was such a struggle for someone like Edward Hopper, realist to be an artist.
Hopper at that time was awful.
Very.
Really?
He got a retrospective in the Whitney in 1950. He had one earlier at MoMA in 1933. So, but he had no tolerance for women artists. It was just, he and his cohort, John Sloan, they were prejudiced against women being artists. You're right in that they thought it was hard enough to be an artist that they didn't want 50% of the population to be enfranchised and compete with them.
No, I think they wanted,
I
I think they had the good German attitude of Kinderkuchen. They wanted them in the kitchen, pregnant, and they did not want the attention taken away from them.
Exactly.
They needed service. Now, if the woman was going to be an artist, she didn't have time to be the slave in the kitchen or the mother or the whatever In fact, many of these women artists had to forego having children because it was either the art or the child. And so even though they might have wanted to be mothers, they did not have children so that they could devote them.
Question?
Yes, in terms of all of this discussion in women, can you discuss the relationship between Elaine de Kooning and Lee Krasner? Because in many ways, they're both of Jewish descent.
No, they're not. Elaine was not.
I'm sorry, that's true, okay. But I read the biography written recently on Elaine de Kooning, and in that biography, it's described how there is a friction between Elaine de Kooning and Lee Krasner. Can you elaborate on any of this?
I'd be happy to, if Gail doesn't want to. Well, I mean, Lee thought that Elaine was a ditz, and she did not consider her an equal, and she thought she took advantage of her husband's name, her husband's style. She had no respect for her whatsoever, and the big difference between them was Elaine was gorgeous and Lee was not. And she had the perfect body, but she didn't have the perfect face, and she didn't age well. And Elaine used her looks.
Well, Lee was furious that she knew that Elaine was having an affair with Harold Rosenberg and Tom Hess. And these were critics that were writing about de Kooning and making him more important than Pollock.
This is true.
And if there's
True.
one thing, we agree.
Yeah. Dead on.
If there's one thing that Lee really cared about, it was Jackson Pollock's reputation, and credit to Pollock where credit was due. And so Rosenberg, I think, really exploited trying to create a rivalry between de Kooning and Pollock, which wasn't even so much there. But Elaine was certainly intervening.
I mean, her students loved her and everything else. And
Elaine,
yeah.
Yes.
But she was the original casting room couch. I mean, hello?
Yeah.
I mean, she had an academic talent, but that was it. She had no ideas.
All this is very well documented in Harold Rosenberg's papers at the Getty. I mean, this is not hearsay.
Would you like to hear my Harold Rosenberg story?
Sure.
Because I'm writing a memoir, and so my roommate and I, in college, we had absolutely no money, and so we used to go down to the 10th Street openings because they would give you wine, and then somebody would pick you up, some old guy would pick you up, take you to dinner in the village. So one night I got stuck with Harold, and he took me to the Cappuccino, as I recall, and then he said, he invited me to his writer's studio, and I didn't understand the concept of, would you like to see my head shakes, right? So we get up there, and he jumps me, and Harold had a limp, and his studio was over the West Side Highway, so I ran down the stairs, and I ran down the West Side Highway, and he comes hobbling after me, and I scream at him, Mr. Rosenberg, you will never understand the art of my generation. Well, my generation hadn't made any art, but he wouldn't have understood it anyway.
What year is this? What year are we talking?
Oh, God, I was like so young.
But around.
Well, I mean, I was probably 57.
Okay.
That was awful.
It's around the same time that a young Judy Chicago comes to New York, sent by the editor, I think of his name, of Art Forum magazine, from John Copeland's, to show her slides.
Phil Leader, okay.
No, it was John Copeland's, to show her slides to Harold Rosenberg, to sort of get help in New York. And she pulls them out, and she's meeting with him at wherever he lived, and he jumps her.
Of course, he jumped everybody. I mean, any little girl was to be jumped on.
Exactly.
You were
pre-Me Too, but that's what was going on.
Well, of course it was. Of course it was. And the point was that if you played ball with Harold, who was just so physically repugnant, you could get something out of it in terms of a review or something like that. And, you know, how could anybody have anything to do with Harold Rosenberg or Glenn Greenberg? I mean, these guys were repulsive. And women would, you know, the casting room couch, they wanted a leg up, as it were. They would have relationships with these really very physically repugnant men in order to get attention, whatever it is.
So Lee was really incensed about it, and that's why she could not tolerate Elaine de Kooning. But it is true that Elaine was much more
She was beautiful.
Beautiful.
She was very beautiful.
She was, what, half a generation younger than we as well, so it was easier to be better looking.
I'm glad I was not of that period, because I came into the scene when Max's Kansas City happened. I was far more interested.
More questions? Yes.
A lot of questions. We'll try to phrase this properly. Just moving contemporarily, continuing to work, write, et cetera, on this era and having all this knowledge. I mean, looking at a show like this, for instance, do you still see a battle in the attempt to get artists like Miriam or any of the other artists working with all these other, strong protagonists, male protagonists? I just learned of this.
I've actually written about male artists.
Yeah, well, I looked through
I was once
Grace
married.
Hartman and Lee Krasner were doing this thing. There was another artist, I forget, I think she used the name Michael Johnson or like that, but it was another Japanese or Korean artist who was doing these really aggressive abstract paintings. And the question really wasn't about that, but just looking like the impact that critics had on this period, leading into the 80s and 70s, and op art and Peter Plagans and people who were writing Darby Bannard, were writing about this era, and kind of Darby was painting and making paintings. It was very much based on this era, Ken Nolan, Olitsky, et cetera. And then, leading into what's going on contemporarily, how important do you think is the critic today in, evaluating what really is important art?
Important to what?
Exactly. Well, that's a great answer.
Well, I mean, right now you no longer have an art world, you have an art market. That's a totally different, situation.
And you have the internet. That's
Well, also, I
changed
guess I was
everything.
kind of commenting on the dialogue. It seemed like, as a not being present at that time, and reading about, Cedar Tavern, I actually was taught by Greenberg, so I kind of, got to know him a little bit. And, his impact in the 80s even was so strong.
Who?
Greenberg.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, Greenberg, I met Clem, it was loathe at first sight. I mean...
Loathe at first?
Yeah, I mean, he used to say, you know what's wrong with the art world? Too many Jewish women with typewriters. Definitely too many Jewish women with typewriters. Two of them right here.
I guess the question would be, in today's environment, how significant, obviously, is the critic compared and the dialogue compared to what was going on? Yeah, I mean, the market's such an influence on what's going on. And is the work, how do you feel like the work being done today? I think earlier you mentioned something about imitators of this time period.
Have you ever heard the term zombie abstraction? Okay, they're basically copies of this work. By people who want a career and who want money. And when money came into the art world, it changed into something else. This was a community of people who were frenemies, as Tom Hess used to call them, and who used to feed each other, take care of each other, drink together, whatever. And it's no longer that. It has nothing to do with the world of today has nothing to do with the world that these people lived in and worked in.
Is there a specific moment you would point to as that kind of change? Or? Yeah,
actually, there is. I have a book of essays called Auto Critique, which is very out of date, but the last essay is called The Auction is the Action. And it was the Robert Scull auction, in which suddenly he was making 1,000% on the artwork he was buying wholesale from the Green Gallery because he was backing the Green Gallery. But basically, Dick Bellamy was picking all these artists, and Scull was then paying for something, but he ended up owning all this stuff. And then he sold it at an auction, and then everybody realized, oh my God, you can make all this money.
Let's take one more question. Is there a question about that?
In the back.
Oh, hi.
So given the sort of spirit of this show, which is maybe rediscovering or giving more sort of prominence to artists who have been a little underrepresented, where do we find today's artists like that, rather than maybe writing off an entire generation of artists? How do we not have, Miriam Shapiro unknown the Mira Shapiro work?
Well, you could do what these people did, which is they used to go to the Metropolitan Museum and look at the old masters, you know, and then they used to go to the Museum of Modern Art where they spent, you know, hours and days looking at their historic collection. And the point is that everybody wants to be, you know, rich and famous today. Well, you know, these people were not rich and famous in 5 minutes, and in fact, in the end, the only person in this exhibition who emerged to be rich and famous is de Kooning. Oh, and there's a little Motherwell.
He was rich before he became famous.
Who?
Motherwell was rich from his family.
No, this is actually, no, because I know a lot about this, because I knew Bob very well, and then I knew the person who saved him financially. He inherited a little bit of money. The money was all Helen Frankenthaler's. She inherited a huge trust fund. And that was very important for women to have a trust fund, because if they're not going to be stuck with a terrible guy or a terrible husband or whatever, you needed a trust fund, which is what Joan Mitchell had and what Helen Frankenthaler had, and made them
But
do.
Motherwell's father was a banker with Wells Fargo. He didn't grow up poor like Pollock.
No, he didn't.
Displaced.
No, he was very upper class.
He wasn't an immigrant. Like, he went to Columbia.
No, he went to Stanford.
But then he went to Columbia also.
No, but Myra Shapiro kicked him out of class, and he said, you can't study with me. You have to go study with Seligman.
But the point is, he could afford tuition.
Oh, absolutely.
Not like Pollock.
No, it's a no, he was upper class.
But I think the question in the back that we were going to end with was something else, the way at least I understood it. I think it was about the plight of artists today and how an artist doesn't end up below the radar and not noticed and not promoted. I think it's always going to be like that. Unfortunately, life isn't fair, and there are always going to be this sort of artists that know how to catch the public eye, like Andy Warhol or Jeff Koons, or indeed Pollock. But artists that either do something new or know how to market themselves. It's a lot about marketing, and it always has been. That's what I think. I kind of study the history of the art market.
Who's marketing these people? I mean, come on.
But a lot of these are only emerging. I mean, my comment coming in here and seeing the Paul Brock and Miriam Shapiro is, wouldn't they be thrilled to be in this show?
Yeah.
So isn't the thing they all hung out together, hang out with other artists?
That's very important, yes. Because the ones that make it sort of pull up all the other boats in the world.
Right, I think that's it.
Yeah. But I think artists have to make art for the love of it and try to figure out how to earn a living.
Well, there are actually people who become artists to make a living. This is crazy.
Yes.
You don't become an artist in order to make money. Not if you become an artist authentically, if that's the only thing you can do. I mean, I taught all my life, and I used to start my classes, the ones that had artists in them, and because I taught both art historians and artists, and I said, how many people in this class can do something different? And I said, well, then do the other thing.
Thank you.